You are now in Module 4. This is the last module in the Prison Rape Elimination Act training. In this module, we'll discuss how to fulfill our duties when responding to sexual abuse under our sexual abuse, sexual harassment policy. Let's review our training objectives. In this module, we will provide information on how staff are to fulfill their responsibilities under the agency's sexual abuse and sexual harassment prevention, detection, reporting, and response policies and procedures. We will also identify how to avoid inappropriate relationships with residents and demonstrate working knowledge of first responder procedures. So how can you assist in preventing sexual abuse? Let's discuss some of those ways. Some ways to prevent sexual abuse include enforcing the agency's zero tolerance policy and following its procedures and rules. Also, supporting the agency's sexual abuse reporting policy. If you see misconduct, you must report it consistently and fairly. Familiarize yourself with your surroundings. Be aware of and respond to lapses in safety and security. Look at the facility staffing plans. Identify blind spots in your facility. This is a way to prevent sexual abuse. Be sure to actively supervise your residents, keeping an alert at all times. Move around the group and constantly engage youth while adhering to the supervision and movement policy. Also, conducting quality supervisory unannounced rounds. Supervisors, this is essential. You should be visible and active in the facility, engaging both staff and the residents. For some general prevention planning, it is important that you know who the agency-wide PREA coordinator is. Also, it is important for you to know your PREA compliance manager at your facility, and also know your policies and procedures for reporting abuse. All supervisory and direct care staff shall be proactive in the prevention of sexual abuse and harassment throughout DJS operations. So what are some ways that DJS are proactive in preventing sexual abuse and sexual harassment? A few ways are listed below. There are background checks that are conducted. In addition to an initial background check, there is also a division that checks Facebook and other social media in regards to staff. We also provide employee training. The youth housing and screening instruments also help with preventing sexual abuse and harassment in confined settings, and also the education that occurs during youth orientation. And finally, residents are provided education and programming. Let's look at interventions. Some interventions that are important to point out. Staff having knowledge or suspicions of alleged sexual abuse or harassment shall take seriously all statements from youth that have been alleged to be victims of sexual abuse and respond supportively and non-judgmentally. They should also immediately inform their shift commander and program administrator. It is important after receiving an allegation of abuse that we ensure that the youth and the alleged perpetrator are physically separated so that there is no possible contact. And if the alleged aggressor is a staff, the shift commander or designee must remove that staff from having contact with all youth. This separation shall be maintained until an investigation is completed and staff receives administrative clearance to resume regular duties. Staff shall refer all alleged incidents of sexual abuse or harassment or misconduct to the Child Protective Services for investigation and determination of child abuse. Also, the Maryland State Police should be notified for the determination of criminal charges. Facility administrators shall cooperate with outside investigations and shall endeavor to remain informed about the progress of the investigation. All allegations of sexual abuse, harassment, or misconduct will be referred to the department's Office of Inspector General for the completion of an administrative investigation. It is important to understand that an investigation regarding sexual abuse, harassment, or misconduct will not be terminated solely because the source of the allegation recants their statement, or even if the alleged abuser resigns from the department. OIG will continue their administrative investigation until it is deemed appropriate to close it, and CPS and Maryland State Police will continue their investigation until that is also completed. As an employee working for this agency, It is important to understand our personal and professional boundaries. So here's a question for you. Why are both personal and professional boundaries important in our work lives? I think this can be best described by really understanding what are personal boundaries and what are professional boundaries. Personal boundaries are guidelines, rules, or limits that a person creates to identify for him or herself what are reasonable, safe, and permissible ways for other people to behave around him or her, and how he or she will respond when someone steps outside of those limits. So what are professional boundaries? Professional boundaries are the conduct, aims, or qualities that characterize a person who conforms to the technical or ethical standards of a profession and exhibits a courteous, conscientious, and generally business-like manner in a workplace. Here are some ways that staff and residents' boundaries become blurred. This occurs when boundaries have clearly not been defined, when staff have not been properly trained to resist the testing of those boundaries, when life gets out of balance, when there is not a reporting culture that supports feedback and accountability, and when the culture is one where staff fear retaliation for reporting inappropriate behaviors. It is important to understand that as an employee of this agency and as a staff working directly with our youth, we set the tone for the relationships. It is important not to bring your own issues into the workplace. It is important to set good boundaries and create healthy relationships in the workplace. Failing to do so causes for boundaries to be blurred. Some ways that may compromise a staff's ability to set good boundaries may be how the way the staff relates to the youth, not knowing how to constructively deal with sexual issues with the youth. Staff may also communicate their own biases regarding sexual orientation and gender identity. It is important in this agency and working with youth in the capacity we do that we avoid inappropriate relationships. We have to set personal and professional boundaries, and we have to pay attention to the signs. We must identify and respond to red flags. There are several red flag indicators that will assist staff in detecting resident or resident sexual abuse. Here are a few listed. Here are some specific to the population we work with. We may see that youth may want to spend more time with a particular staff member, or using a staff member's first name, or we may see an increase in their misconduct. Some red flags for staff on youth possible misconduct could be a staff member calling out a youth at odd times, dropping into work at odd times, or having inappropriate sexual conversations or bringing inappropriate materials to work. Another indicator that might impact staff are personal problems or life changes, or coming to work early and staying late to talk to a specific resident. Some red flags regarding environment. We may see an increase of fights on a unit, or unusual contraband and flirtatious language. Some signs of potential inappropriate boundaries may include isolation from family and friends, confusion about boundaries, or being stressed out or overworked. Some other signs of potential inappropriate boundaries may also include loneliness, going through difficult personal challenges, use of alcohol or substances to cope, divorce, sexual frustration, or inactivity. Some challenges with boundaries that we may face when working with our youth. Some of those include being helpful yet remaining professional. Another challenging boundary that staff may face is that staff may fall into a parenting role with the youth instead of modeling in a professional manner the appropriate behaviors that youth should demonstrate. It is important as an employee with this agency that we be proactive not only with our residents but with our staff. So when we see such behaviors being demonstrated by our staff may need additional guidance and reminders about those boundaries. Here's a list of possible indicators where staff may need additional guidance and reminders about healthy boundaries. Some of those include when we see isolation from not only family and friends, but maybe staff, when they appear stressed out and overworked, and when there is interaction with residents, former residents, and family members on social media. In addition, if our staff members appear to be using alcohol or substances to cope, feeling like no one cares or understands, is going through some difficult times, and appears to be sexually frustrated. So in addition to maintaining healthy boundaries and being aware when our boundaries are being compromised, it is important that we also understand how to demonstrate respect. So what is respect? It is positive feelings of esteem or difference of a person and includes specific actions and conduct that reflects back that esteem. Respect acknowledges others as human beings and treats them humanely and with basic dignity. Simple phrases, gestures, and words like please and thank you, and direct eye contact shows levels of respect. Respecting an individual does not mean condoning criminal behavior or that you agree with their identity and behavior. Respecting a resident increases the likelihood that you will be respected in return and may be a critical difference for you in a tense situation or conflict. It is also important to understand that words are extremely powerful. The language that staff uses help create a culture of safety and respect. If staff are disrespectful, offensive, or are using abusive language, it creates an environment that condones the same behavior from the youth in custody. This is particularly important when working with the LGBTI community. You have to understand that you may not always be aware of which staff or youth in custody identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, or intersex. Your language helps create a culture of what is acceptable or unacceptable to say. So what is safe and respectful language? I'll highlight about two of them. Take a look at them. The use of professional and culturally appropriate language as opposed to slang or slurs. And being aware of how your own beliefs affect your perceptions and how words you may use on the job could be offensive to others. So let's take a look at using words and conducting professional communication with youth in custody, including the LGBTI community. Some of the objectives we will cover is regarding appropriate pronoun usage as a way to conduct professional communication with the LGBTI youth in custody, communication tools for staff, and the dynamics of the LGBTI children in custody in confined settings. Let's spend a few minutes exploring the importance of our use of pronouns in effective communication. Pronoun usage is important to be considered when working with the LGBTI youth, and especially transgendered youth in custody. Using the correct pronoun is a way to show respect and to demonstrate acknowledgement of their gender identity. A pronoun is a word that replaces a noun in a sentence. The Department of Juvenile Services has policies in place to address how to work with youth in confined settings and to address how to work with transgender residents in a confined setting. As mentioned in previous slides, it is important that we as staff establish respect, professionalism, and effective communication. Best practice suggests when working with transgendered youth, we use pronouns to support their needs. With regards to communication tools, all staff should be able to clearly communicate boundaries, seek help and advice if having problems, confront coworkers if they observe problems in behavior, and model positive interactions. Effective communication is important. It is an important skill that will help you in your job, as well as manage and keep all staff and youth in custody safe. Some skills that are included in effective communication include nonverbal communication, attentive or active listening, the ability to manage stress in the moment, and the capacity to recognize and understand your own emotions and those of that person whom which you are communicating with. With effective communication, consistency of language and terminology is important. We do not want to use perpetuated stereotypes. Use open-ended questions. And everyone, including staff and youth in custody, demonstrate respectful and professional demeanors. The use of effective communication yields great benefits. It gives youth in custody a straightforward explanation of our purpose as staff in asking them questions or of what we are trying to accomplish. The use of effective communication provides steps to maximize respect and privacy when an LGBTI individual is disclosing confidential information. It also decreases defensiveness through listening and open lines of communication between staff and youth in custody, and creates a facility agency culture of safety and respect, including sexual safety. On this next slide, this gives you an outline of how language can not only be verbal, but also nonverbal. Here's an interesting statistic. Over 70% of our communication is actually nonverbal. Take a look at some of the nonverbal communications that are listed. We have hand and body gestures, facial expressions, body language. Even ignoring or rolling of the eyes is a form of communication. It is important that we utilize professional language. Using demeaning, degrading, or devaluing words in front of youth creates an unhealthy and unsafe atmosphere for staff and other youth in custody. While it is important to communicate with children in custody in a language they can understand, it is important that we as staff refrain from using inappropriate slang or in-custody jargon terminology. We must model the behavior. Let's take a moment and look at discussing gender and orientation. Before you have a discussion regarding a youth in custody's gender or sexual orientation, ask yourself these questions. When and why might staff need to talk about a youth in custody's gender or sexual orientation? When, where, and with whom is it appropriate to discuss this information? And are there safety concerns that need to be considered? Some other questions you might want to ask are, what are the circumstances when it would be relevant? What should you do if a youth in custody discloses this information to you? And also, what is our agency's policy and facility operating procedures regarding this matter of gender and sexual orientation? Just to share a few more statistics regarding transgendered youth. In a recent Bureau of Justice Statistics study, more than 50% of children in custody experience a mental health issue during a reported period. Specifically, transgendered individuals have an even higher rate of anxiety, depression, or other related disorders. Transgender individuals also may engage in self-injurious behaviors or be at greater risk for suicidal ideation. An important key factor here is discrimination against the LGBT persons has been associated with higher rates of psychiatric disorders, substance abuse, and even suicide. Such experiences of violence and victimization that have been frequent have had long-lasting effects on the individual and the community. Also, personal, family, and social acceptance of sexual orientation and gender identity has also impacted their mental and personal safety. The lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgendered, and intersex youth are at a significantly higher risk than their heterosexual peers for homelessness and substance abuse issues. Currently, there is little research regarding intersex individuals. However, they may experience some or all of the same type of biases directed to the LGBT population. As an employee of this agency, it is important that we continuously do checks in regards to our establishing of healthy boundaries. As an employee working directly with our youth and also working for this agency, it is essential for us to establish healthy boundaries. This next section of the video is a series of 12 questions where you can take a moment to do a self-check about how appropriate your boundaries are when interacting with youth. Take a look at each question and answer them honestly. The slides that you just reviewed with a series of 12 questions is known as the Daily Dozen. The questions were actually developed for professionals working in correctional settings to specifically be able to self-evaluate their boundaries with the offender population. If you answered yes to any of the above questions, this may mean that you might be at risk for unhealthy boundaries. Sexual misconduct often begins as an overfamiliarity with a resident. It is important as a staff member you identify what your next steps will be to help yourself. It could be reviewing a policy and procedure, talking to a peer or a mentor, bringing questions to a supervisor. The important piece here is to address the red flags and not let it get to a point where you or others could lose a career or worse. In this next section, we're going to talk about staff's response. An appropriate and consistent response to incidents of sexual abuse is important and will assist in maintaining credibility in the reporting mechanisms. When the resident population can see that reports and responses to incidents are taken seriously, they are more inclined to utilize the system appropriately. PREA Standard 115.365 requires that the facility have a plan to respond to an event of sexual assault. It is important that we are knowledgeable about first responder duties and also who is considered a first responder. It is also important to know the role of the agency investigator. Familiarize yourself with the role of medical and mental health staff and know what is expected of supervisors and agency leadership. Let's take a look at first responders. As defined by PREA standards, a first responder is this first security staff person to respond to the report of sexual abuse. That would be defined by our agency as residential advisors or direct care staff. In the event that a non-security staff member is the first to respond to a situation of abuse, it is important for that person to instruct the victim not to do anything that could potentially destroy evidence of the abuse. PREA Standard 115.364 outlines first responders' duties when responding to a sexual abuse situation. A first responder is required to separate the alleged victim and abuser, preserve and protect the crime scene, request that the victim does not take any actions that could destroy the evidence, and to ensure that no evidence is destroyed. So let's take an in-depth look of first responder duties. It is broken down into 11 steps. First, staff responding to an incident of alleged abuse shall take the preliminary steps to protect the alleged victim, secure the incident area pending investigation and the collection of evidence by the Maryland State Police, MSP. The use of the PREA response kit will be used to preserve physical evidence that may be on the youth and the youth's clothing. The PREA response kit will be utilized by our medical staff. Number 3, we want to ensure that youth and the alleged perpetrator are physically separated to avoid further contact. 4, ensure the alleged victim does not shower, eat, drink, brush their teeth, urinate, defecate, smoke, or change clothes until after evidence is collected. Also ensure that the alleged aggressor does not shower, eat, drink, brush their teeth, urinate, defecate, smoke, or change their clothes until after the evidence is collected. 6, staff shall immediately notify medical staff and the shift commander of the alleged abuse to initiate services promptly. 7, it is important that we ensure the youth receives an immediate medical evaluation. 8, if appropriate, ensure transportation of the alleged victim to the nearest emergency room that has a qualified, trained forensic medical examiner for examination and testing. Your facility's administrator will know which hospital to send the alleged victim. 9, also, if appropriate, ensure transportation of the alleged aggressor to the nearest hospital and emergency room that has the qualified trained forensic medical examiner for examination and testing. 10, notify mental health staff of the alleged abuse to promptly initiate services. And 11, ensure mental health is contacted upon the youth's return to the facility to initiate services. The 11 steps just listed are the most common types of first response. Staff members should assume that they will have to perform their first responder duties during their career. It is important for staff working with youth who have been victims of past abuse to understand that not everyone responds to sexual assault the way you think they should. Some victims can be irrational and others can be calm. Depending on the situation and the history of the past sexual abuse, the responses will vary. Therefore, it is important that you listen to the resident in a non-judgmental manner. Be aware of both your verbal and non-verbal responses and clearly document the who, what, when, whys, and wheres of the particular situation. Also, as a first responder, it is important for you to follow our agency's policy regarding reporting up the chain of command. Only telling staff who need to know about the alleged abuse, involving investigators, and involving medical and mental health staff. When questioning residents who are reporting allegations of sexual abuse, it is important to gain the facts. Where did it happen? Who was involved? Do not conduct a full interview or interrogation. That will be completed by an investigator. Your interactions with the victim should be culturally and developmentally appropriate and gender specific. Discussing sex may be culturally prohibited. Same sexual behaviors may be shameful. Youth may not have the appropriate language to use when discussing the incident. It is important to understand females may want to process and discuss. They may want to describe in more detail and express emotion. It may take more time to establish trust due to previous abuse history. They prefer relational language. In contrast, boys will use less words and may provide fewer details. They may act out instead of talking. It is important as a staff working with victims of abuse that you treat all victims with dignity and respect. It is important that we ensure the privacy of information, that we only share with those who legitimately need to know. With regards to reporting sexual abuse, again, the Department of Juvenile Services has a reporting policy in place. It requires that all staff shall report immediately and in accordance with the incident reporting and the reporting of child abuse policy and procedures. Any knowledge, suspicion, or information they've received regarding any incidences of sexual abuse or harassment that have occurred in the facility involving a youth, whether or not it is a part of the department. Also, our reporting tool requires that retaliation or neglect and violation of responsibilities that may have contributed to the incident or retaliation are also reported. Taking a look at the next few slides, it highlights areas within our policy that are pertinent when responding to a situation of alleged abuse. It highlights how staff can take reports of alleged abuse verbally, in writing, anonymously, or from third parties. It also highlights that all reports shall be documented on an incident report and must be completed by the end of the workday or the completion of a shift. In regards to a situation where alleged sexual assault has occurred, the facility administrator must provide oversight to ensure that all allegations of sexual abuse and sexual harassment have been reported to the proper authorities. This includes CPS, Child Protective Services, Maryland State Police, and also the Office of the Inspector General for investigation. Facility administrators should adhere to the policies and procedures as outlined in the incident reporting policy and also within the investigating child abuse and neglect policy and procedures. Medical and mental health practitioners shall also report sexual abuse in accordance with mandatory reporting laws and the incident reporting policy and procedure. These practitioners must inform the youth at the initiation of services of their roles and responsibility to report and also regarding the limitations of confidentiality. They shall obtain informed consent from the youth before reporting information about prior sexual abuse or harassment that did not occur in an institutional setting, unless the resident is under the age of 18. By having coordinated response to sexual abuse. This ensures that all appropriate staff are actively involved in responding to the incident and that they know what their role should be after the incident is reported. Coordinated response involves referring to an agency's specific written plan for the first responders, investigators, medical mental health personnel, and agency leadership. If a victim is transferred to another facility, the agency is still required to notify that receiving agency of the needs for medical, mental health, or other social services. Take a moment and look at the role of the shift commander in regards to coordinated responses. They ensure that the youth is protected from the aggressor. They also arrange for the transport of a youth when directed by medical staff to the nearest hospital emergency room. When requested by a youth, a shift commander can also contact a child advocate, qualified staff member, or a qualified community-based organization staff member to accompany and support the youth through the forensic medical examination process and investigatory interview to provide emotional support, crisis intervention, information, and referrals. The shift commander will ensure that all notifications are made in accordance with the incident reporting policy and procedures. This includes notifying facility administrators, youth parents and guardians, community and facility case managers, social workers when appropriate, etc. They will ensure that the incident is reported to CPS. They will actively cooperate with all outside authorities, Maryland State Police, as well as CPS, and they will ensure the completion of an incident report in accordance with the incident reporting policy and procedure. In the following bullets, medical staff will observe, interview, and examine the youth. They will provide emergency measures if necessary. They will use the PREA response kit to preserve physical evidence that may be on the youth or the youth's clothing. They will complete a nursing report of a youth's injury forms. They will report incidents to CPS, complete the suspected abuse and neglect initial form, and forward a copy to CPS and the shift commander or their designee. They will photograph any visible injury in accordance with the incident reporting procedures and refer as needed the alleged victim to the nearest hospital room that has qualified trained forensic medical examiners. They will offer victims of sexual abuse timely information and timely access to prophylactic treatment for prevention of sexually transmitted infections, HIV, emergency contraceptives for pregnancy, and access to treatment as appropriate. They will also offer pregnancy tests to victims of sexually abusive vaginal penetration. If pregnancy results, medical staff will offer the victim appropriate and comprehensive information about the timely access to all lawful pregnancy-related medical services. Regarding behavioral health staff responsibilities, they will meet with the youth as soon as possible to provide assessment and crisis intervention on the day of notification of the alleged abuse or harassment. They will also refer the youth to the community-based organizations, institutions, and support groups equipped to evaluate and treat for the sexual abuse and assault. Behavioral health staff will also conduct a mental health evaluation to assess the need for counseling and long-term follow-up. Regarding the roles of facility administrators, regional directors, and program administrators, they will review to ensure staff completed all steps to protect the youth, provide immediate medical and mental health services to the youth, report the incident for investigation, and provide follow-up for the services to the youth. Such administrators will also notify the youth's attorney of the allegations as soon as possible and no later than 14 calendar days of the allegation. This concludes the end of Module 4. By the end of this module, we have provided information on how staff are to fulfill their responsibilities under the agency's sexual abuse and sexual harassment prevention, detection, reporting, and response policies and procedures. We've identified how to avoid inappropriate relationships with residents and demonstrate a working knowledge of first responder procedures. Congratulations, you have completed all 4 modules in the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services Prison Rape Elimination Act training. You are now ready to take your Module 4 exam. Please make sure that you have signed all necessary documents and policies and turn those in to the necessary supervisors.